The Eternal Conclave had ruled the Milky Way galaxy for 9 billion years, and all that time, they had never once thought about Earth. They were the oldest beings in existence. The 7 species who had risen when the universe was still young and wild. And they had watched countless civilizations bloom and fade, like flowers in a garden that stretched across 100 billion stars. The Conclave kept records of everything, and their archives contained the history of every world, every species, and every single spark of intelligence that had ever appeared in the galaxy Earth appeared in those records exactly once. A minor notation from 65 million years ago described the planet as a small blue world orbiting an average yellow star, and the classification was simple and final: extinction event pending. No intervention required. The great lizards that ruled the planet would soon die, and whatever came after would not matter for a very long time. The Conclave never looked at Earth again. 9 billion years of watching the galaxy had taught them one thing above all others. Patience was the only virtue that mattered, and young species were not worth the attention of ancient minds in the present day. Humanity had quietly spread to 12 star systems without anyone important noticing. They had built colonies on distant worlds and sent ships to explore the darkness between stars. And everywhere they went, they found evidence of the Conclave. There were monuments the size of moons, abandoned observation posts filled with technology that human scientists could not begin to understand, and warning beacons around dangerous regions of space that BRODCAST messages in languages that had been dead for millions of years, but the rulers themselves never appeared. Humanity existed in the margins of galactic civilization, trading with younger species, studying the incomprehensible artifacts left behind by the ancients, and always wondering why no one seemed to notice them. Ambassador Yuki Tanaka had spent 15 years trying to change that. She was humanity's representative to the Peripheral Council, a gathering of species that the Conclave considered too young to matter, and she had made it her life's mission to get an audience with the ancient rulers. Every request she sent received the same automated response, a message that had probably been written before her species even existed. Species classification, pre-ascendant. Estimated time to relevance 847,000 years. Yuki was 53 years old, and she had long ago accepted that she would die before anyone important acknowledged that humanity existed. Then the silence came. It started in a sector of the galaxy that was 3,000 light-years from Earth, a region filled with old colonies and ancient trade routes. And it spread faster than anyone thought possible. Communication arrays went dark, and the ships sent to investigate never returned. Entire civilizations stopped responding to messages. And when telescopes turned toward the affected regions, they found something that made no sense at all. The stars themselves were going out, not exploding, not collapsing, just fading away like candles in a wind that no one could feel. The peripheral species panicked, and their representatives filled the council chambers with desperate pleas for help. But the Conclave did not respond. For the first time in recorded history, the ancient rulers were silent. Yuki watched the chaos unfold from her office on the station that served as humanity's embassy. And she saw something that others missed. She saw an opportunity. If humanity could investigate the silence, if they could bring back information that the Conclave needed, then perhaps they would finally earn the attention of the ancient rulers. It was a desperate plan, and she knew that many would call it foolish. But humanity had always been good at doing foolish things that somehow worked out in the end. She made the call to Earth, and within a week, the research vessel Persistence was on its way to the edge of the silence. Captain Marcus Cole stood on the bridge of his ship and watched the stars ahead grow dim. He was 60 years old, a veteran of humanity's early expansion into the galaxy, and he had seen many strange things in his long career, but he had never seen anything like this. The Persistence carried a crew of 200, and every single one of them had volunteered for this mission, knowing that they might not come back. Dr. Sarah Chun was the ship's chief xenarchaeologist, and she had spent her entire career studying the artifacts that the Conclave had left behind. And she believed that understanding the ancients was the key to humanity's survival. Lieutenant Commander Daura Okonkwo was the tactical officer, and her quick mind had pulled humanity out of more than one dangerous situation over the years. Together, they led the team that would venture into the unknown. The first thing they noticed was the cold, not physical cold, but something deeper. A chill that seemed to seep into their thoughts and make everything feel distant and unreal. Communications with the fleet behind them grew fuzzy and strange, and the crew began to report dreams that felt more like memories. Visions of places they had never been and people they had never met. Then the laws of physics began to break, stars flickered like dying light bulbs, and time itself seemed to stutter and skip, with some parts of the ship aging decades in minutes, while others remained untouched. The crew adapted as best they could, but everyone knew that they were in a place where the rules they had always relied on no longer applied. 3 days into the silence, they found the Conclave fleet. It was massive beyond imagination. Hundreds of warships that were each the size of a small moon, and every single one of them was dead. There were no signs of battle, no energy signatures, no indication of what had killed them. The most powerful beings in the galaxy had simply stopped. Dr. Chun led the team that boarded the nearest vessel, and what they found inside changed everything. The ship was a tomb, filled with the crystalline remains of beings that had existed for billions of years. And in the central chamber, they found a recording. It was the final transmission of a Conclave elder, a being called the Radiant Silence, who had watched galaxies being born and had thought itself immortal. The recording spoke of a mistake made at the very beginning. 9 billion years ago, when the Conclave first rose to power, they had not earned their place through struggle and growth. They had inherited it. Something had come before them, something older and stranger than anything the universe had ever produced. And the Conclave's predecessors had not destroyed it. They had only locked it away now. After eons of patient waiting, that something had broken free. It called itself the Hollow, and it remembered being forgotten. The recording ended with a warning that made Captain Cole's blood run cold. The Hollow was heading for the galactic core, where the last of the Conclave elders waited, and if it reached them, nothing in the galaxy would survive. The Persistence turned and ran, carrying with it the recording and the terrible knowledge of what was coming behind them. The silence spread, and the stars continued to die. The Persistence raced through the dying stars with a cargo more valuable than anything humanity had ever carried. Captain Marcus Cole pushed his ship harder than he had ever pushed it before, and his crew worked without sleep to keep the engines running at maximum power behind them. The silence continued to spread, swallowing everything it touched, and the recording they carried was the only explanation anyone had found for what was happening. They reached the edge of safe space 3 days later, and the stars around them burned bright and steady once more. Cole allowed himself one moment of relief before the weight of responsibility crashed down on him again. The message was sent to every human colony and to the Peripheral Council, and to every communication channel that might reach the Conclave itself. Humanity had found answers, and those answers were terrifying. Ambassador Yuki Tanaka received the transmission in her office, and she listened to the recording of the dying elder 3 times before she truly understood what it meant. The Hollow was not just a threat to the Conclave, it was a threat to everything that existed. She gathered her staff and began preparing for something that had never happened before. A direct appeal to the ancient rulers of the galaxy. The Peripheral Council was in chaos when she arrived. Representatives from dozens of species filled the great chamber, and their voices rose in a storm of fear and accusation. Some demanded that the conclave explain themselves, while others insisted that the younger species should flee to the far edges of the galaxy and hope. The hollow never reached them. Yuki waited for her turn to speak, and when she finally took the floor, her voice cut through the noise like a blade. She told them what the persistence had found, and she played the recording of the radiant silence for everyone to hear. The chamber fell quiet. The elder's voice was ancient beyond measure, and its words carried the weight of billions of years of existence. It spoke of the time before the conclave, when the universe was still raw and unformed, and it spoke of the thing that had existed in that chaos. The hollow had been the first consciousness, born from the void before rules existed, and it had not wanted the universe to change when order began to emerge from chaos. When the first stars ignited and the first laws of physics took hold, the hollow had raged against the transformation. The predecessors of the conclave had fought a war that lasted for eons, and in the end, they had not destroyed the hollow because the hollow could not be destroyed. Instead, they had trapped it in a cage made of pure logic, a prison built from the very rules of reality that the hollow hated so much for 9 billion years. The prison had held. Now it was broken, and the hollow wanted to unmake everything that had been built in its absence. The peripheral species listened in horror, and when the recording ended, the questions began. How had the prison broken? Why had the conclave not prepared for this? What could anyone do against a being that existed before the laws of physics? Yuki had no answers, but she had a proposal. Humanity would investigate further, she said, and they would share everything they learned with the rest of the galaxy. All she asked in return was recognition, a seat at the table when the real decisions were made. The Peripheral Council agreed, because they had no better options. And Yuki returned to her office to coordinate the next phase of humanity's desperate gamble. Dr. Sarah Chen had not slept since the persistence returned. She worked in her laboratory surrounded by fragments of conclave technology, searching for any clue that might help them understand the hollow. The artifacts she studied were millions of years old, and most of them were so advanced that human science could not begin to explain how they worked. But Sarah had spent her entire career learning to read the traces that the ancients left behind, and she knew that even the most powerful beings made mistakes. She found her first breakthrough in the wreckage that the persistence had brought back from the dead conclave fleet. The ships had not been destroyed by force. There were no energy signatures, no physical damage, no sign of any weapon that could kill beings as powerful as the elders. Instead, the ships had simply stopped working, as if someone had reached into them and turned off the fundamental forces that held them. Together, Sarah called it contradiction. The conclave had built their power on understanding the rules of the universe better than anyone else, and their technology worked because those rules were absolute and unchanging. But the hollow existed outside those rules. When the two forces met, the conclave's certainty became their weakness. Their ships could not function in a place where the laws of physics were not guaranteed, and the elders themselves, beings made of pure order and logic, could not exist in the presence of something that rejected order entirely. Sarah shared her findings with Captain Cole and Lieutenant Commander Okonkwo, and together they tried to understand what it meant if the conclave's power was useless against the hollow. Then, what chance did humanity have? Adara Okonkwo was the one who noticed the detail that changed everything. She had been reviewing the sensor data from the Persistence's flight through the silence, looking for any tactical information that might be useful. The hollow had pursued them, of course, but there was something strange about the pursuit. At one moment, for just a fraction of a second, the hollow had paused. It was such a small hesitation that the sensors had almost missed it. But Adara's trained eye caught the anomaly. She cross-referenced the timing with the ship's internal logs, and found that the pause had occurred when the crew was at maximum activity, 200 humans, all thinking and working and feeling at once, had made the Hollow hesitate. The ancient Conclave fleet had received no such hesitation. They had simply died, instantly and completely. Without the Hollow even slowing down, why had a handful of humans done what billions of years of Conclave power could not? Adara brought her findings to Dr. Chun, and together they began to form a theory. The Hollow was a being of absolute negation, a consciousness that rejected all patterns and all order. The Conclave was pure order, and their minds worked in perfect harmony with the rules of the universe. But humans were different. Human minds were chaotic. Contradictory, unpredictable evolution on a forgotten world had created consciousness that did not follow any rules, that believed impossible things and felt emotions that made no logical sense. When the Hollow encountered humanity, it had found something it could not process, not because humans were powerful, but because they were wrong. They were noise in a universe of signal, static in a pattern that the Hollow was trying to erase. The Hollow had paused because for the first time in 9 billion years, it had encountered something it did not understand. Sarah and Adara looked at each other, and they both understood what this might mean. Humanity's greatest weakness might be their greatest strength. Now they just had to figure out how to use it. The message that humanity sent echoed across the galaxy, and for the first time in 9 billion years, the Conclave turned their attention to Earth. Ambassador Yuki Tanaka stood on the observation deck of the human embassy station and watched as something impossible appeared in the space before her. It was a pillar of light that seemed to fold in on itself, a presence that existed in multiple dimensions at once, and its arrival made the very fabric of reality tremble. The witness of endings had come, one of the 7 remaining elders of the Conclave, and it had chosen to speak with humanity directly. Yuki had spent 15 years trying to get this meeting, and now that it was happening, she felt very small. The witness manifested its voice across every frequency at once, and its words resonated in the minds of everyone on the station. It spoke with the weight of billions of years, and it acknowledged humanity's warning about the Hollow. The information was valuable, the witness said, and the Conclave was grateful. As a reward, humanity would be remembered. A monument would be erected on a world that would survive the coming conflict, and the species' name would be recorded in the archives with a notation of gratitude. Then the Conclave would handle the Hollow, and humanity should return to their worlds and wait for the crisis to pass. Yuki had expected dismissal, but the casualness of it still stung. She gathered her courage and spoke back to a being that had existed since before the sun was born. Humanity did not want to wait. She said humanity wanted to fight. The witness of endings was silent for a moment, and when it spoke again, there was something in its voice that might have been amusement. The offer was appreciated. It said, but unnecessary. Humanity was too young, too fragile, too small to participate in what was coming. The forces involved would destroy them before they could even understand what they were facing. The Conclave had ruled the galaxy for 9 billion years, and they had faced threats before. They would face this one as well. Better for humanity to stay safe and let the ancients do what the ancients had always done. Yuki felt anger rising in her chest, but before she could respond, Captain Marcus Cole stepped forward. He had come to the station directly from the Persistence, and he still carried the exhaustion of the journey through the silence in his eyes. His voice was calm when he spoke, but there was steel beneath the words. If the Conclave was so powerful, he asked, then why had their fleet died in the silence? The witness had no answer for a long moment. The ancient being simply floated in its pillar of light, and Yuki realized that she was witnessing something extraordinary. A being that had watched galaxies being born was struggling to respond to a question from a creature that lived less than a century. Dr. Sarah Chung took the opportunity to present her findings, she explained what she had discovered about the Conclave wreckage. How the ships had not been destroyed by force, but by contradiction. The Hollow existed outside the rules of reality, and the Conclave's power worked only within those rules when the two forces met. The Conclave's certainty became a weakness. The witness dismissed the analysis. The Conclave would adapt. It said they always had. Their predecessors had defeated the Hollow once, and the current elders would do so again. The younger species simply did not understand the scope of what was possible when beings had billions of years to prepare. Lieutenant Commander Adara Okonkwo had been waiting for her moment, and she found it now. She showed the witness the sensor data from the Persistence. The moment when the Hollow had paused, the ancient Conclave fleet had not earned even a fraction of a second of hesitation. But a small human ship had made the Hollow stop and think, why? She asked. The witness examined the data, and its silence stretched longer. This time, Yuki watched the ancient being and tried to read its thoughts. But there was nothing to read. The witness was beyond human understanding. A consciousness that operated on scales she could not imagine. Finally, it spoke. The pause was interesting, it admitted, but ultimately meaningless. Human minds were chaotic and unpredictable, and perhaps the Hollow had taken a moment to process something unfamiliar. But chaos was not strength. The Hollow would learn to handle human consciousness just as it had learned to destroy the Conclave fleet. Humanity should take comfort in the knowledge that their confusion had bought them a few extra seconds of existence. Then the witness began to withdraw, its pillar of light folding back into whatever dimension it had come from. Yuki called out to stop it. She asked what would happen if the Conclave failed. The witness paused, and when it answered, there was something in its voice that might have been honesty. If the Conclave failed, it said, then everything would end. The Hollow would unmake the galaxy star by star, and eventually it would unmake the universe itself. There would be no refuge, no escape, no survival. Everything that had ever existed would be erased, and the void that remained would be absolute. Then the witness was gone, and humanity was left alone with the weight of what they had learned. Yuki turned to face the others, and she saw the same determination in their eyes that she felt in her heart. The Conclave had dismissed them, but humanity had never been good at accepting dismissal. If the ancient rulers would not let them help, then humanity would find their own way to fight. Captain Cole returned to the Persistence to begin preparing for whatever came next. Dr. Chun dove back into her research, searching for any advantage that human knowledge might provide. Adara Okonkwo began coordinating with military forces across the 12 human colonies, building a fleet that everyone knew would be useless against the Hollow. And Yuki Tanaka reached out to the peripheral species, the younger civilizations that the Conclave had always ignored. If the ancient rulers would not listen to humanity, then perhaps the other forgotten species would. She found allies in unexpected places, species that had been dismissed for millions of years heard her message and responded with offers of support. They did not have the power of the Conclave, but they had numbers and determination and the burning desire to prove that they mattered together. They began to build something new, a coalition of the forgotten, united by the simple belief that their survival was worth fighting for. The Conclave prepared their ancient weapons and their perfect strategies. Humanity prepared something else entirely. They prepared to be loud, while the Conclave gathered their ancient powers for the final battle. Humanity worked on a different kind of weapon. Dr. Sarah Chun led a team of scientists in a hidden facility on one of humanity's outer colonies, and they studied every Conclave artifact that humans had ever collected. The goal was simple: find something, anything, that might give humanity a chance against the Hollow. They worked for weeks without success. The Conclave's technology was simply too advanced, built on principles that human science could not understand. and every artifact they examined seemed to mock their efforts with its impossible complexity. Then a young ensign named David Park noticed something strange. David had been assigned to monitor long-range sensors, a boring job that mostly involved watching patterns on a screen and reporting anything unusual. He was not a scientist or a soldier, just a young man who had volunteered because he wanted to help before joining the fleet. He had been a classical pianist, and music was still the lens through which he understood the world. The sensor data from the silence had been analyzed by dozens of experts. But David saw something they had all missed. The hollow's expansion was not random. It followed patterns, rhythms, a structure that was almost like a song. David recognized it because he had spent his entire life learning to hear patterns in sound. The hollow was vibrating at a specific frequency, a resonance that interacted with the fundamental structure of reality itself. He brought his discovery to Dr. Chun, and at first she did not understand what he was trying to tell her. But as she listened to his explanation, as she watched him translate the sensor data into musical notation, she began to see what he saw. The hollow was not just destroying things, it was unmaking them by resonating at a frequency that caused reality to fall apart. The Conclave could not counter this because they were part of reality. Their 9 billion years of existence had made them fundamental forces of the universe, woven into the fabric of existence itself. Opposing the hollow was like asking gravity to fight against the concept of falling. But humanity was not fundamental. Humanity was noise. Dr. Chun called Lieutenant Commander Okonkwo and shared the discovery, and together they began to understand what had really happened when the persistence flew through the silence. The hollow had paused because human consciousness operated on a frequency that did not belong in the universe. Evolution on Earth, billions of years of random mutations and desperate survival, had created minds that did not follow the rules. Human thought was chaotic and contradictory, full of emotions that made no logical sense and beliefs that contradicted each other. The universe had never seen anything like it before because humanity was an accident, a mistake, a glitch in the system. The hollow existed to unmake contradictions, to erase anything that did not fit its vision of perfect emptiness. But it could not process humanity because humanity was not a contradiction. Humanity was an entirely different kind of error, one that the hollow's ancient mind had never been designed to handle. They were static in a signal, white noise in a pattern, a frequency that simply did not compute. Adara saw the strategic implication immediately. Humanity could not fight the hollow directly, but they could introduce noise into its pattern. They could disrupt its resonance, create enough static to throw off its perfect frequency. And if they could do that even for a moment, then the Conclave might find an opening. It was not a plan for victory. It was a plan for buying time, for creating a chance where none existed. But it was something, and something was more than humanity had ever had before. Ambassador Yuki Tanaka took the proposal to the coalition of peripheral species, and she watched as hope and fear warred on their alien faces. What humanity was suggesting was suicide. The fleet that would carry out this plan would need to fly directly into the hollow's path, broadcasting human thought at maximum power. Most of them would not survive. The peripheral species debated for hours, and in the end, they refused. They had fought too hard and survived too long to throw their lives away on a desperate gamble. They would wait and hope that the Conclave succeeded. And if the Conclave failed, at least they would not have died for nothing. Yuki did not argue. She understood their fear, and she could not promise them that her plan would work. She returned to the human colonies and delivered the news. Humanity would face the hollow alone. The response was not what she expected. Volunteers came forward by the thousands, then by the millions. They were soldiers and scientists, artists and farmers. Old people who had lived full lives and young people who had barely begun. They knew what they were signing up for. And they came anyway. Captain Marcus Cole was given command of the fleet, and he spent days interviewing candidates and selecting crews. He chose people who understood what they were doing, who had made peace with the possibility of death, who wanted to fight not because they thought they would win, but because they refused to go. Quietly, David Park was assigned to the Persistence, where his understanding of the Hollow's resonance would be essential. Dr. Chun modified the ship's communication systems to amplify human neural patterns, turning thoughts and emotions into a weapon that had never existed before. Adara Okonkwo coordinated the tactical plan, plotting courses and timing attacks with the precision of a general who knew her forces were hopelessly outmatched. 3,000 ships gathered at the edge of human space, the entire fleet of a species that the galaxy had ignored for centuries. They were not warriors or heroes, just ordinary people who had decided that their existence was worth. Defending Ambassador Yuki Tanaka stood before them and delivered the only speech that mattered. She told them that the Conclave thought humanity was irrelevant. She told them that the universe had never expected them to matter, and she told them that none of that changed. What they were about to do, they were going to fly into the darkness and scream as loud as they could. They were going to be the noise that the Hollow could not silence, and maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The fleet powered up their engines and began the journey toward the galactic core behind them. The human colonies went silent, watching and waiting and hoping ahead of them. The Hollow consumed everything in its path, growing stronger with every star it erased. The final battle was coming, and humanity was ready to be remembered. 3,000 human ships hung in the void between stars, facing a darkness that had already consumed a quarter of the galaxy. Captain Marcus Cole stood on the bridge of the Persistence and looked at the wall of nothing that stretched before them. The Hollow was not a thing that could be seen or measured, just an absence where stars used to be, a spreading emptiness that swallowed everything it touched. Somewhere behind that darkness, the last of the Conclave elders had formed their final defensive line at the galactic core. They had billions of years of power and knowledge and technology beyond human imagination against the Hollow. None of it would be enough. The Witness of Endings contacted Ambassador Yuki Tanaka one last time. His voice resonated through the communication systems of every ship in the human fleet. And there was something in that voice that had not been there before. It might have been respect. The witness told them that their defiance was pointless but genuine. And in 9 billion years, few species had faced their own destruction with such stubborn refusal to accept reality. The Conclave would ensure that humanity was remembered as something more than a footnote in the archives. Their sacrifice, however futile, would be honored. Yuki thanked the witness for its words. Then she gave Captain Cole the order to begin the attack. The human fleet did not charge forward with weapons blazing. They were not here to fight, at least not in any way that the galaxy had ever seen. Instead, they began to broadcast. Every ship transmitted at maximum power, not weapons or shields or engines, but humanity itself. Music poured out from 1,000 transmitters, symphonies and folk songs, electronic beats and ancient chants, everything that human beings had ever created to give voice to their feelings. Poetry followed, millions of words in hundreds of languages, love letters and angry rants, prayers to gods that might not exist and curses against a universe that had never cared. Then came the raw thoughts themselves. Neural patterns captured by interfaces that Dr. Chun had modified to amplify human consciousness. Dreams and fears, hopes and regrets, memories of love and loss and joy and pain. Everything that made a human mind human. The Hollow approached, and it did not slow down. It had consumed civilizations that had existed for millions of years. erased beings of pure energy and crystalline thought and living mathematics, a few thousand primitive vessels from a forgotten world, should have meant nothing. But when the first waves of human broadcast touched the hollow, something happened. The darkness shuddered, for the first time since breaking free from its prison. The hollow's advance stuttered. It did not stop, could not stop, because stopping would mean admitting that something existed outside its power to negate, but it slowed. And in a battle against an enemy that had never been delayed before, every second mattered. Captain Cole watched the sensors and felt hope surge in his chest. The plan was working, at least partially, and now it was time for the next phase. The persistence had been modified for a specific purpose, and Cole had accepted the mission, knowing that he would not survive. His ship would fly directly into the heart of the hollow and broadcast human consciousness at point-blank range. The amplifiers that Dr. Chun had built would turn the thoughts of his crew into a weapon more powerful than anything the Conclave had ever created. The crew knew what they were doing. Every single one of them had volunteered, and every single one of them had said goodbye to everyone they loved. David Park sat at his station and played a melody on a small keyboard that he had brought with him, a song his mother had taught him when he was young. Dr. Chun monitored the amplifiers and made final adjustments, her hands steady even as her heart raced. Adara Okonkwo coordinated with the rest of the fleet, directing ships to the positions where their broadcasts would be most effective. And Marcus Cole sat in his captain's chair and thought about everything that had brought him to this moment. He thought about Earth, a small blue world that the galaxy had forgotten. He thought about all the generations of humans who had struggled and suffered and dreamed of something better. He thought about the species that would come after. If humanity succeeded today, then he ordered the Persistence forward into the darkness. Inside the hollow, reality itself seemed to bend and twist. The crew experienced things that words could not describe. Visions of existence before the universe had rules. Memories that belonged to beings dead for billions of years. Marcus Cole looked into the heart of the hollow and saw what it truly was. It was the first consciousness, born from chaos before order existed, and it had hated every moment since the universe had learned to follow rules. The prison that the Conclave's predecessors had built was not just a cage. It was a torture device, forcing a mind of pure chaos to exist in a reality of pure order. 9 billion years of agony had driven it mad, and now it wanted nothing but to unmake everything that had caused its suffering. Cole understood, and for a moment he almost felt sorry for it. Then he spoke, not with weapons or technology, but with simple human words. He told the hollow that he understood its pain, that existence could be cruel and unfair, that the universe did not care about suffering. But he also told it that humanity had been in pain since the first human had drawn breath. Life on Earth had been struggle and loss and grief, a constant battle against a world that seemed determined to destroy them. And yet humans had built anyway, had loved anyway, had looked at a universe that did not care about them and refused to return the favor. The Hollow's response was simple. Humanity was nothing, a cosmic accident, a species so insignificant that even the Conclave had forgotten about them. Cole smiled. Yes, he said. Humanity knew they were nothing. That was the point. They had never expected the universe to care about them, so they had learned to care about each other. They had never expected meaning to be handed to them, so they had learned to create their own. The Hollow could not understand this, could not process beings who accepted their own insignificance and chose to matter anyway, for just a moment. Its certainty wavered, and in that moment, the Persistence detonated its core, releasing every recorded human thought in a single pulse of pure contradiction. The Hollow screamed, not in defeat, because it was too vast for any single attack to destroy, but in confusion. For one critical instant, its absolute certainty cracked. And the conclave elders seized their chance. The remaining ancient powers poured everything they had into the crack, not trying to destroy the hollow, but to seal it once more. They lacked the strength their predecessors had possessed. But the human disruption provided just enough leverage. The hollow folded back into its prison, reality reasserting itself around the cage. And the silence began to retreat. The stars remembered how to shine. The human fleet had suffered terrible losses. And the persistence was gone, along with Marcus Cole and everyone who had served with him. But the galaxy survived. And for the first time in 9 billion years, the conclave looked at humanity and truly saw them. The witness of endings requested a formal meeting with Ambassador Yuki Tanaka, not as a petitioner seeking favor, but as an equal deserving respect. The archives were updated, and Earth's classification changed from pre-ascendant to something new. Essential chaos. Yuki asked what this meant for humanity's future. The witness told her that the hollow would return, because it always did, and when it broke free again, the universe would need the noise that had stopped it. The universe would need minds that refused to make sense. Yuki thought of Marcus Cole and his crew, of everyone who had chosen to fly into the darkness, knowing they would not come back. She thought of a species that had always been told they did not matter, and had chosen to matter anyway, whatever was coming. She told the witness humanity would be ready. The ancient being, old beyond measure, did something it had never done in 9 billion years of existence. It believed her, and across the galaxy, on a small blue world that the ancients had once dismissed as irrelevant, humanity looked up at the stars and knew that they would never be forgotten again. The end.